The main challenges with Mifid II and GDPR for most of the post-trade area that I'm focused at is really the collection of that data. So the reporting itself is relatively straightforward, but collating and collecting that data is the sort of first issue, particularly the larger firms and sort of the more global, the more complex that can be. The second really is the data quality and the data enrichment. So there's a lot of, I think, moving from just over 20 fields to about 65 fields that you have to report in terms of the transaction reporting for Mifid II. Then that enrichment is including some of the trader IDs and decision makers, and that really brings in some of the data security issues and data encryption, which is another challenge that sort of people have. And finally, I think it's the eligibility, what you should be reporting and the sort of making sure you're reporting the right areas. That leads on to sort of GDPR, where some of that critical data in terms of personal IDs needs to be secured, both not only encryption, but also who's allowed to see that data and seeing the sort of data protection from that perspective. And that comes on pretty quickly. We've got January in terms of the 2018 as the deadline, and GDPR following pretty swiftly on in May 2018. Yeah, well, the first one actually, which is pretty prevalent at the moment, is sort of cloud technology. So I think lots of people have been talking about that for many years, but I think now we're sort of seeing actually that coming to fruition in terms of its flexibility and scalability that can provide. So our sort of product at Torstone called Inferno is sort of cloud-based, so that allows us to deploy incredibly quickly, and has sort of helped us in the very short term. A sort of typical example was actually we got a client in Germany last year who obviously was concerned about Brexit. It was sort of just before the referendum, and they demanded to make sure that that was in Europe. So we actually deployed that very swiftly, actually on an Amazon sort of based private cloud in Frankfurt itself, but that could have easily been in Dublin or Amsterdam or any sort of area within Europe and indeed the world. On the second side, I think we've come across, again, using some of the Amazon technology, Athena. I hate to use the word big data, but our system Inferno has got a lot of structured data within that. But combining that structured data with unstructured data, that helps a lot of the data analytics that you want going forward. And I think a lot of our clients have been asking for not only data quality in terms of querying from the regulatory point of view, but also actually that data quality for data analysis of failures, settlement failures, the patterns of which clients are delivering correctly and which are failing. So you can actually be a little bit more proactive in focusing your energies on those failures to make sure you correct them, even before they become a problem. I think a lot of the firms for the regulatory changes that have been going on up until now, and even though the deadline has sort of changed by a year, I think have been using sticking plasters to meet those deadlines. Particularly the larger firms where there's so much complexity to provide those regulatory changes. I think one of the things I see for the future and trying to future-proof those changes, because I think those sticking plasters are expensive. If you keep putting those sticking plasters on, it becomes intolerable in terms of the cost going forward. So I think people have got to look at a medium term, looking at trying to remove some of those legacy systems that causes those sort of extensive costs. They've got to look at some of the more modern technology that allows you actually to rapidly change, because these regulations are not going to stop going forward. So putting the right base in place for flexibility and scalability on that regulation, I think, is the key to future-proofing. So our sort of strategic focus going forward is a couple of areas. One of them is geographically. So we actually opened up a Tokyo office earlier this year, and that's been very successful. We've got 3 new clients since the beginning of the year in Japan. Another area is the Nordics, so again geographically, and I guess finally looking at North America. I think entering Canada, I think in sometime in 2018 will be always on the cards. The other area where I think we've seen our sort of clients asking us about is the control of cost. I think cost is absolutely still fundamental to sort of reducing those costs as margins are getting tighter and tighter. And to do that, I think you need to consolidate both across asset class. So having a system that is multi-asset class, I think, is sort of key to reducing that cost, and also one that has more than sort of the core features. So that, again, you can consolidate a number of systems into a single platform, and I think some of the newer technologies and particularly the sort of cloud-based activity we're doing really enables that to happen much swifter than it has before.